New Yorkers, they're rude, they're crude, they don't give you any time, no one's friendly when you walk down the street. I don't get that.
No,
I don't
it's
get
not
that at
true.
all. I actually love
That's
the
a huge
people.
misconception,
It's a huge
yeah.
misconception. When we walk down the street, I love how friendly people are to us.
You know Drew and Jonathan Scott as the charismatic billion-dollar titans of HGTV. But hiding in their massive shadow,
Every family has a story that television cameras never capture. Behind the perfectly staged living rooms, the chiseled jawlines, and the billion-dollar renovation empire that Drew and Jonathan Scott built for the world to admire, there is a third brother. A man who helped lay the very foundation of everything the Property Brothers became, yet spent years watching from the shadows while the world celebrated his younger siblings. His name is J.D. Scott, and what happened to him over the course of 14 months is the kind of story that changes the way you see everything: fame, family, health, and survival. Most people who follow HGTV religiously could not tell you his full name without pausing. They might vaguely remember seeing him pop up on a holiday special or crack a joke beside his brothers during a promotional clip. But beyond those brief appearances, the world simply did not know who J.D. Scott was, and for a long stretch of time, it seemed like the world was not meant to know. Because while Drew and Jonathan were winning awards, signing network deals, and renovating dream homes for grateful families on camera, J.D. was locked inside a darkened house in Las Vegas, unable to tolerate normal room temperature, convinced he was preparing to die. This is that story, and it deserves to be told in full. James Daniel Scott was born the eldest of 3 boys in Vancouver, Canada. Growing up as the older brother of identical twins is a particular kind of experience that very few people ever get to understand. From the very beginning, Drew and Jonathan had something J.D. did not: a built-in audience, a mirror image, a novelty that drew eyes wherever they went. J.D. was just the older brother. Singular. Unremarkable by comparison, at least in the way the world tends to measure these things. Their father, Jim Scott, was a man shaped by discipline and real-world toughness. He had spent years working in the Hollywood stunt industry and behind the scenes of film production, which meant the Scott household was built around a certain understanding of how entertainment actually worked. Not the glamour of it, but the grinding, unglamorous machinery underneath. Jim raised his sons to be resilient, to push through, to get the job done regardless of how they felt. J.D. absorbed those lessons perhaps more deeply than anyone realized. As a child, J.D. channeled his energy into martial arts, eventually earning a black belt and becoming an instructor at a young age. He was also gifted creatively, gravitating towards sketch comedy, theater, and storytelling in ways that suggested he had a natural talent for performance. But allergies and physical sensitivities plagued him during those formative years, and doctors at the time treated the symptoms casually, as though they were simply the ordinary discomforts of childhood. Nobody connected those early warning signs to anything more serious. That oversight would cost J.D. enormously later in life. When the Scott family set its sights on building something in the entertainment world, it was J.D. who helped design the blueprint. In 2002, the 3 brothers co-founded Scott Brothers Entertainment. While that name would eventually become associated almost exclusively with Drew and Jonathan in the public imagination, it was J.D. who helped establish the creative and corporate framework of the company from the ground up. He served as a creative director, managing production strategy, overseeing branding decisions, and ensuring that the family's image remained consistent across every platform. This kind of behind-the-scenes work is often invisible precisely because it is done well. When the camera turns on and everything looks effortless, nobody thinks about who spent 16 hours making sure it would. J.D. was that person. He worked punishing days that most people would find unsustainable, all while Drew and Jonathan became the faces of a franchise that would eventually span dozens of television shows, merchandise lines, and international partnerships. To be fair, J.D. did appear on camera from time to time. He hosted segments, showed up on brother-themed competition specials, and made enough appearances to remind regular viewers that there was, in fact, a third Scott. But network dynamics being what they are, the brand identity of the Property Brothers was built around the symmetry of twins. 2 brothers. Identical faces. Perfect television. There was simply no easy way to fit a third into that equation without disrupting the visual logic that made the format work. So JD remained in the structure without being on the marquee. He has spoken publicly, with characteristic grace, about making peace with that reality. He was proud of what the company was building. He believed in his brothers. He found meaning in the creative work itself, even when nobody was watching him do it. But the psychological weight of living in that particular shadow, the shadow cast by two people who share your blood and your childhood and your earliest dreams, is not something that disappears simply because you decide to accept it. That weight accumulates, quietly, slowly, until one day it is not the only thing accumulating. By 2018, J.D. Scott had been operating at full capacity for years. He was eating what he believed was a healthy diet, heavy in seafood and lean proteins, trying to maintain the physical endurance his workload demanded. He was traveling, producing, creating. He was also, though he did not know it yet, slowly being poisoned. The first signal came during a family trip to Italy in May 2018. Drew was getting married, and the entire Scott family had flown over to celebrate. During the ceremony, J.D. experienced something he could not fully explain. A sudden, disorienting episode that he initially dismissed. The stress of travel, he told himself. The emotion of the occasion. He pushed it aside and kept smiling for the cameras, because that is what you do when you have spent a lifetime learning to push through. But when he returned home to Las Vegas, the pushing stopped working. Without warning, J.D. suffered what appeared to be a cardiac episode. The chest pressure was accompanied by a strange numbness running down his left arm and a deeply unsettling sensation he described as a crawling feeling moving beneath his skull. He finally went to the emergency room, expecting answers. What he got instead was a clean bill of cardiovascular health and a complete absence of explanation. His heart, according to every test they ran, was fine. His brain scans showed nothing. Whatever was happening to him existed entirely outside the reach of conventional diagnostic tools. That was, in many ways, the most frightening outcome possible. Because when there is no name for what is destroying you, there is also no treatment. There is no protocol. There is nothing to fight except the uncertainty itself. What followed was a 14-month medical ordeal that J.D. later described in unflinching detail. The symptom that most dramatically reshaped his daily life was a complete physical intolerance to normal room temperature. The threshold was stark and unforgiving. The moment any space he occupied rose above 69 degrees Fahrenheit, his body responded with what he described as the sensation of his skin burning from the inside. It was not discomfort. It was not irritation. It was a neurological shutdown that left him collapsed, bedridden, and sometimes motionless on the floor for hours at a time, staring at the ceiling, waiting for his body to reset. His world contracted to a single, heavily air-conditioned room with blackout curtains. The Las Vegas sun, which pours through every window and seeps under every door, became an enemy. Stepping outside was impossible. Even the natural warmth of human touch could trigger a painful reaction. He became, in the most literal sense, a prisoner of temperature. Meanwhile, the Scott Brothers brand continued its upward trajectory. Drew and Jonathan filmed shows, gave interviews, renovated homes. The machine kept moving. And J.D., who had helped build that machine, could not leave his bedroom. He spent enormous financial resources consulting specialists across the country. Rheumatologists, neurologists, radiologists, and others, each of whom ran exhaustive tests and returned the same baffling result. Nothing. On one particularly brutal clinic visit, 25 consecutive vials of blood were drawn from his arm. He underwent repeated brain scans and imaging procedures. He lived for months with the terrifying suspicion, raised by one medical team, that he might have unruptured brain aneurysms. 3 separate neurological experts evaluated him. All 3 walked away without answers. His savings disappeared. His physical strength continued to erode. And at some point during those dark months, J.D. Scott sat down and did something that no one in his position should ever have to do. He drafted a final email to the woman he loved, his fiancée Annalie Bell, containing instructions for what she should do after he was gone. passwords, financial accounts, contacts. He scheduled it to send on a delay. He genuinely did not expect to survive the night. He did survive. And then he survived the next night, and the next. But the relief of each morning was shadowed by the knowledge that nothing had changed, and no one could tell him why. Annalie Bell is a significant part of this story, and she deserves to be recognized as such. Long before she became JD's partner in life, she had built her own career as a makeup artist and creative professional, working on entertainment sets with considerable skill and reputation. When JD's health collapsed, she did not step back. She stepped closer. She accompanied him through every consultation, every disappointment, every terrifying episode. She sat beside him when he posted what became the most important piece of content either of them would ever share. In July 2019, JD and Annalie sat in front of a camera together and recorded a raw, unedited video that ran nearly half an hour. They posted it directly to Instagram, bypassing the usual infrastructure of publicists and network approval and carefully managed messaging. JD looked visibly unwell. His physical deterioration was evident on screen, a stark contrast to the energetic, charismatic presence his television appearances had projected. But his voice was clear and his purpose was specific. He described his symptoms in precise detail, not for sympathy, but as a deliberate, open-source search for someone anywhere in the world who might recognize the pattern. He and Annalie understood that conventional medicine had reached the limit of what it could offer him. So they went directly to the public, gambling that somewhere in the vast network of human experience and medical knowledge, a connection might be made that no specialist had yet managed. The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from around the world. People offered theories, prayers, personal stories, and referrals. It also brought cynics and critics who questioned the authenticity of his illness, a particularly cruel response to someone who had already exhausted both his resources and his hope. JD addressed those critics directly and without apology. He had nothing to prove to strangers on the internet, but he was not willing to let doubt undermine a search that might save his life. The breakthrough, when it finally came, arrived through exactly the kind of chance encounter that you might expect to find in a film script rather than real life. Annalie, working her regular position as a makeup artist on a Property Brothers production set, was reviewing the background files of an upcoming episode's participants when she noticed something significant. One of the homeowners featured in the episode was a functional medicine specialist, a physician whose practice was built around a fundamentally different approach to the body. Rather than treating isolated symptoms as separate problems requiring separate solutions, functional medicine approaches the human body as an interconnected system in which one compromised area can cascade into failures across multiple others. It was precisely the framework that JD's case had been missing. Annalie reached out immediately. In September 2019, JD underwent a new round of specialized testing through this physician's practice. The results, when they came back, explained everything that 14 months of conventional medicine had failed to identify. 3 separate toxic conditions had converged inside his body simultaneously. The first was a serious gastrointestinal infection that had methodically destroyed his gut lining over a prolonged period, dismantling his immune system's ability to function and leaving him defenseless against everything else attacking him. The second was a condition known as fluoroquinolone toxicity, cellular damage caused by a class of antibiotics he had taken at some point in the past, which had quietly compromised his neurological and muscular systems in ways that no standard scan could detect. The third finding was perhaps the most dramatic: acute mercury poisoning. His tissues carried toxic levels of mercury, almost certainly accumulated through the heavy seafood diet he had maintained for years while trying to stay healthy. The contamination was severe enough that local health authorities launched an official investigation into the source. 3 invisible forces, each one serious on its own, had combined into something his body could not withstand. And every specialist who had examined him had been looking for something else entirely. Recovery was not a single moment. It was a daily, disciplined, unglamorous process that required JD to dismantle almost everything he had previously known about how he lived and what he ate. Seafood was eliminated entirely. Gluten, dairy, soy, and refined sugars were removed from his diet. He began a targeted detoxification protocol designed to clear the mercury from his system while simultaneously rebuilding his damaged gut lining. Progress was slow, measurable in lab results rather than dramatic physical transformations. But it was real. By the end of 2019, JD reported that a single round of detox treatment had reduced his mercury levels by approximately 50%. More meaningfully, he described a qualitative shift in how he felt, a clarity of thought and a sense of physical presence that he had not experienced in well over a year. He used the word alive deliberately, because it was the only word that accurately described the return of something he had genuinely feared was gone forever. On October 31, 2019, exactly 1 year after he and Annalie had gotten engaged, they were married. The wedding was held in a vintage-themed venue in Las Vegas, a celebration attended by around 100 guests that was equal parts ceremony and survival party. Annalie reportedly made her entrance on horseback. Drew and Jonathan, serving as groomsmen, dressed as video game characters because of course they did. The whole event had the feeling of people who understood exactly how close things had come to ending differently, choosing to celebrate as loudly as possible. In the period following his recovery, Drew and Jonathan organized a renovation of JD's Las Vegas home as part of a Property Brothers special. What the television audience saw was a touching family project. What was happening off-camera was considerably more complicated. JD was still managing significant physical limitations during filming. He wore a cooling vest between takes to prevent his system from being overwhelmed by the production environment and removed it only when the director called for action. Editors used every tool available to them to ensure that his physical fragility did not show through on screen. The finished renovation was not just aesthetic. The house was redesigned with his health specifically in mind. Materials chosen for low chemical sensitivity, climate systems capable of maintaining the precise temperature his nervous system required. It was, in its own way, a monument to everything the family had been through together. Today, J.D. Scott occupies a different kind of space in the world than the one he once aspired to. He has stepped away from the relentless pace of corporate entertainment production and moved toward a life built around creative independence and personal